الدين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. لكل لحظة أبدا عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. وإلى حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة. لا إله إلا الله 12 مرة. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. الله الله تعالى. هو 12 times. ثبت الماء في قلبي خالدا بخير المؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم أحينا عليها يا حي ومتنا عليها يا مميت وبعثنا عليها يا باعث إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم حققنا بحقائقها ورقائقها ودقائقها واجعلنا بها من أهل حقيقة التوحيد فعافية. وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نوين التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجهه سبحانه وتعالى وثوابه وقربه. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وهب لنا حكما والحقنا بالصالحين وعلمنا تأويل فقهنا في الدين واهدنا سواء السبيل برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها وأنت خير الوارثين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. In maintaining consistency with regards to one's adhkar and awrad, Imam al-Haddad would even suggest that a person naturally would sometimes get bored from reading the same adhkar and awrad every day. And so one of the wisdoms in the many facets and many forms of ibadah that the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention is that the nafs can find nashat and rejuvenation in different forms of worship. And so a person has to try and find what works for them every day or every night. And if someone finds something working, then that's the cup they drink from for as long as their nafs finds pleasure in that. Pleasure used very cautiously, meaning it has to be doing for the heart what heart's work needs to be done. And so sometimes a person might find themselves inclined to Quran or certain forms of dhikr or certain forms of salawat. Some of the people of Allah, as is mentioned in the Risala al-Qashayriyah, they would, before starting their evening's ibadah, would say tonight is the night of Qiyam, because they find their heart's portion in Qiyam, and they would spend then the entire night standing in Salah and reciting Quran. And another night they would say tonight is the night of Ruku', and then they would spend the entire night in Ruku'. Tonight is the night of Sujood, and they would spend the entire night in Sujood. And some people would spend their nights in salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. Some people would spend their nights in different forms of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people would spend their nights also in revising or reading books on the Sharia or books on the purification of the heart, and that is also a form of worship. And as we have learned, it is the most supererogatory, it is the more preferential form of worship for someone who has not yet learnt the basic sharia in the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that regard, and this also has to be said cautiously, is listening to lectures or courses which teach one sharia also would fall under this form of ibadah. But we say cautiously because in today's times we use these devices for our suluk, but the devices have distractions. And the suggestion here is to have, if we are using these devices for our learning, and specifically learning of the sharia and learning of the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is to then dedicate a special device for that which doesn't have any of these social media apps, etc., notifications which are going to distract a person. And sometimes many people ask, what about following lessons online, and what about following the lessons of the mashayikh over any of these platforms? And there's two things. One is, it is most definitely a blessing of our times, that a person can learn from any shaykh in the world, if they find their heart attached to them and if they find that they benefit. But it has to be taken with caution. If a person is following these lessons, but the nafs is making an excuse from attending the lessons, if they are if it is possible to attend these lessons nearby, or to attend the like of these lessons nearby. And so the nafs wants a person to get lazy, so it says, let's listen to it online. And what's the sign of laziness is when you're listening to it online, you're laying in your bed, you're falling asleep, right? Or on the side, you're doing something else, you're distracted, except for a woman perhaps, or someone who's at work, or who has chores at home that they have to do, and now they wouldn't be attending those lessons anyway, so they listen to it in the background. But the nature and the adab of listening to lessons online is to behave and act as though you are sitting in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So facing the qibla, sitting, right, turning off the notifications. If possible, also putting it on a speaker, on earphones, and you don't even have the phone in front of you if it's in audio. And as we said, the sign, one of the problems with listening to things online is a person will start, and then if notifications, someone phones, someone sends a message, right? Or we've looked at 2 other videos and come back to this, we're playing games with ourselves, right? The person has to be sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as attending a lesson, as we are taught, we don't come for the shaykh or the person or the lessons, we are coming for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person who listens to things online in this particular way, and they bring to mind that they are in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would sit facing the qibla, they would take notes, they would even pause to maybe check up certain ahadith, and they bring to mind that I am learning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this person could to some extent benefit even better than the one who is coming to the lesson but still doesn't come with presence of heart and mind, or even in the lesson they're playing with their phone or checking messages. And the goal of all of this is to begin to learn to have presence with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our seeking of knowledge, as we ought to have presence with Allah in our ibadah. And the purpose of that is to learn sincerity, because when Allah sees that a person is sincere, then He opens the doors. And a person has to continuously try acknowledging that we don't have that sincerity. And that is why, as we mentioned, Imam Shafi would say, we began seeking knowledge for other than Allah, but knowledge refused to come to us except when we made it for the sake of Allah. And many times a person would have to trial and error, go through different books and courses, and then finally realize, you know what, I need to actually repeat everything all over again. I need to start from scratch because I haven't actually mastered, I haven't actually understood. I've gone through the books, I've gone through the courses, I've attended the lessons just for the sake of attending, as a form of consolation of my nafs. But I haven't really done what was required to be done. And in this regard also, when it comes to these programs, and it comes to, for example, Qiyamul Layl, sometimes, many times when we organize programs, who are we organizing it for? We are organizing it for the people, for the others, so that people may attend. And the first and foremost intention should be for ourselves. We are organizing these programs for ourselves. We organize the Tahajjud program not so that people will attend, but because we want to attend. And there's a nice story about this sincerity. A student came to his sheikh, and he was doing what he was doing in terms of his daily schedule and routine, his azkar, his awrad, his knowledge, and he was in the company of his sheikh, and that's the most delightful thing for a person, to be in the company of his teacher, especially if there is a special relationship between them in love and amicability, etc. But he tells the Shaykh that I have not yet attained what they call al-Fath al-Akbar al-Mutlaq al-Mubin, the greatest of openings. And this is known, this is a nomenclature of people on the path. And so the Shaykh tells him that you will not get this fath and this opening until you go to this particular town and you go and connect the people's hearts there to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the meaning of da'wah. Right? Da'wah, calling to Allah, meaning connecting people's hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he becomes very, very happy, but sad at the same time because he's leaving the company of his Shaykh. But if the Shaykh said so, then there must be khair in it. But this town was very, very far away, 3 or 4 hours by camel or horseback. And so he finally packs up and he goes to this town. And when he gets to the town, he sees that there's not even a masjid there. And when he is searching around, he finds that the masjid itself is dilapidated, worn down, and the people of that community are actually dumping their garbage. Meaning they are a community which have completely lost the path. And we find this in certain villages and towns around the world, and this is why it's important to actually go for da'wah, right? Especially in the Muslim world after the time of colonization, etc. There are many, many people who were just lost. And so he goes there, he starts knocking on the people's doors, trying to introduce himself, and I've come here to teach, my Shaykh has sent me, etc. And they close the doors on his face. And some of them even disparage him and swear him, etc. And he thinks, astaghfirullah, how can, maybe perhaps my Shaykh made a mistake, this is not the town I'm supposed to. He's expecting, right, lightning and thunder, I'm going to enter the town, people are going to be, right, receiving me, I'm getting this. And the Shaykh has promised his big openings. And what do we understand by openings, right? Many times what we understand, or the nafs wants to think about achieving things on the path, many times it's connected to fame and it's connected to name and, putting our mark in the sand, right? Or engraving our name in stone. And so he wants to leave the town, but then he remembers that this is actually the advice of my Shaykh, he knows better. And so he stays. And he's waiting for someone to come out at the time of Salah. Perhaps there is an Imam, or perhaps there is more. No one comes. And he realizes, if I don't actually just go and clear this garbage dump out, no one's going to actually do it. So he starts at least cleaning the masjid. And he gives adhan and he gives iqamah for the Salah, Dhuhr Salah, Asr Salah, Maghrib Salah, Isha Salah. No one comes to the masjid. Right? The next day he makes the resolve, he's going to pack his things. He packs his things and he wants to head home. As he's about to head out of the town and city, he says, but why would my Shaykh tell me to come here? And then he begins to realize that perhaps there is a lesson in here that I need to learn for tarbiyah. And so he stays in the masjid, he reads some of the adhkar and awrad that he was doing, and the days start going by. He's waiting for something to happen. And his nafs is continuously troubling him about staying, about going back, and he's thinking about the company of the Shaykh and the great lessons and the big books and the wisdoms. And each lesson there would be pieces of knowledge that are new, and the students are all, and his nafs is playing games with him. Right? Until within a week he starts realizing that what is the purpose of coming here? And what is the difference? Who am I? Who have I come for? I've come for the people, or have I come for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if there were 1 million people here, what would I have been doing? I'd be having a lesson, I'd be doing adhkar after salah, I'd be teaching people. And then he realizes that whether there ought to be, or whether there is 1 person, or 1 million people, or no people at all, my program with Allah should not change at all. And so he begins to read the salah. After the salah, he does his adhkar as though there would have been people there, and he starts teaching the lesson to no one. Because who are we teaching for? We are teaching for Allah, right? And who are we attending for? We are attending for Allah. And so he starts teaching, and Dhuhr he has his program. And for 2 years he continues like this. It took him 2 years to learn sincerity. And after 2 years, 1 person comes, right, and starts talking to him, because they're seeing him doing this day after day, day after day. And then another person and another and another, right? And then it is said that town actually became known for the ilm and knowledge and taqwa and piety of its people, and it became a place which students would then come to study and seek knowledge. And this is the meaning of sincerity, to find the istiqamah. Many times we want to do things only because if there are going to be people that are going to be attending, or if there is some sort of ulterior motive. Whereas we have to learn to just grind the milk constantly to teach our nafs and ego that it is only about Allah. Similarly, there was someone that came to Tarim and then he went to his hometown, and he was the only one in that particular city that came to Tarim or understood something of what to do on a daily basis. So Thursday night they do the prophetic seerah, etc. And he went home and he asked the mashayikh, there's no one else in my community. Should I still do the prophetic seerah? And they told him the story as well, that who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for people, or are you doing it for? And so he began on a Thursday night sitting, right, from before Maghrib, and he did the Wird Latif. After Maghrib, he would do the Ratib of Imam al-Haddad, then he would do the prophetic seerah, and then he would take one of the books of Imam al-Haddad, as the Mashayikh had guided him, and read something from the books of Imam al-Haddad, one page, right? And he's on his own, there's no one there. Did it for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, he says, there's no one coming, right? And the Mashayikh advised him, they say, just continue, because we're not doing it for the people, we're doing it for our own benefit. And he goes for 6 months, right? And later on, his wife feels sorry for him. She says, every single week, my husband, right, week in, week out, he's going and he sends the messages in the groups, and no one comes for the lessons. Even to a point, people started to laugh at him. This guy's just going at it on his own. And so one day, out of feeling sorry for him, his wife comes and attends with her children, and his brother comes and attends with the children because they were staying in the same area, right? And when they attended, they saw the effect on the children, and they felt also in their heart something of the barakah and the blessings. Obviously, this is spending time with Allah. And so they then attended. And from 2 people, 3 and 4, to a point where at least 15 to 20 people then started becoming regular, right? And so this is what we need to learn, because naturally, as we said, we have to accuse ourselves of insincerity. Why are we doing things? We're constantly coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking Allah to grant us that sincerity. And they say, الصدق سيف قاطع ما وضع على شيء إلا قطعه. That this truthfulness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like a sharp sword. It is not put on anything except that it cuts it. Meaning, if a person has sidq, then we are not concerned about means, right? And many times da'wah, people would think da'wah and taking this message of Allah depends on means, and we need money and we need resources and this and that, and right? A person just needs to be, the da'wah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was never established upon resources and material things. It was established upon being sincere with Allah and this truthfulness with Allah and doing things sincerely for Allah. And it is never, the effects also of the da'wah is never physical. A person doing something on his own and there's no one around, but he is continuing on his path as though there are a million people, then the effect on that in the ummah is as though there are millions and millions of people coming. And you don't, or we don't know, Mashaykh would say, we don't know how much of the khair that a person does cancels the plots of shaitan, right, and the machinations of the West. They would tell the students, one step that you take in the path of Allah to connect people's hearts to Allah unravels, right, and throws spanners in the works of the machinations of the enemies of Allah and the plots of shaitan from a place that we don't even know. And so there's always this battle between light and darkness. And we don't have to be at war with people, but we just have to do what we do, which increases the light in our hearts and increases the light in the areas that we are in, and ultimately even in the world and the universe, and puts out these darknesses. Shaitan and the people opposed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want to fill the world with darkness. And the people of Allah, their job is to fill the world with light. And the conditions in a particular town or city or area in the world is if there is more light or if there is more darkness. Just reading Quran, Surah Yasin is read for what it is intended. Reading Surah Yasin as well illuminates a person's heart. and it brings barakah to one's home. Habib Ali advised the other night in Masjid al-Mihdar as well. He said, make sure that even in the homes, our children, and no one in the home goes a day without reading the Quran. It brings barakah. When a person recites the Quran, the angels come into the home. When a person sends salutations on the Prophet ﷺ, the angels come into one's home. Then there is amicability. But if there is a home in which there is no Quran being recited, what happens? Right? There will always be issues and problems and fighting, etc., etc. All of these du'as which the Prophet ﷺ taught us to read, it is all there to bring illumination. Now, continuing with the Minhaj al-Abidin of Imam al-Ghazali, and we are still busy with the first hurdle on page 25. And Imam al-Ghazali was speaking about the importance of the three types of knowledge for a person to attain, which is the knowledge of Aqidah, creed, with regards to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is imperative and obligatory for a person to know with regards to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, what is possible and what is impossible. When we say impossible meaning it is impossible. The mind cannot fail, or the mind would not be able to come to an understanding. It is, for example, Inna Allah la yukhliful mi'ad. Allah does not break His promises. Right? Allah is wajibul wujud. And a lot of what is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what they say imkaniyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to do this. So many things that happen in the world, or even when we hear about things, the question is, does Allah have the power to, even if Allah has the power to do, where is the power of Allah? We cannot even. Does Allah have the ability and the power to give? Or can Allah give someone or something the ability and the power to do something? And as long as we take the causes of everything back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that Allah is, right, the wajibul wujud and everything comes from Him, then we can begin to understand things in nature. With regards to the Prophet ﷺ, who he is, that is with Aqidah. Then, as Imam Ghazali talked about fiqh, ahkam, rulings across the entire corpus of the Sharia, fiqh, tahara, ibadat, fasting, hajj, zakah, etc., business transactions, marital relations, and also the major and minor sins. This is also important. Then finally, the purification of the heart. This is with regards to knowledge. Now, so with regards to the proofs of affirmation, with regards to creed, the root of all of them is found in the Book of Allah. They have also been mentioned by our sheikhs in the books they have compiled about the principles of religious subjects. In short, whenever ignorance of something puts you in danger of perdition, the quest for knowledge therefore is an obligatory duty which you are not permitted to abandon. This is our summary conclusion. Allah is the source of enabling grace. And generally sometimes new Muslims or people who have not been brought up on the religion, when they come across things which cause doubt in their minds, especially with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they are obliged to learn the proofs for that. So, they would come with these questions: if God is good, then why does evil exist in the world, etc., etc. Many times these arguments which are brought against Allah and against the religion are just foolish ways, right? Or if we can say, tricks in questioning. So someone asks you a question and they say, have you stopped beating your wife? What will you say? Yes? They ask you, say, yes or no, have you stopped beating your wife? No. Meaning you're still beating her. If you say yes, you were beating her. The problem is in the question. The question is not framed correctly. So many times, right, especially in these debates and arguments, the question obviously is not correct. And the question doesn't need to be answered. The question needs to be re-evaluated, right? And these are sometimes, this is in logic and the science of semantics, etc. A person needs to just be aware. And there's, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always at every point in time allow and inspire people from the Muslim Ummah who will reply to these different types of things. We should not get caught up in it. One of the tricks of shaitan also is to get us caught up in all these debates and discussions, even what we refer to as comparative religion, right? And it's important to note this, that the way of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is never one of debate. There is no benefit in debating someone even about religion and the existence of Allah and that Islam is true, etc., etc. But when the person you debated left the debate, he leaves with a bad taste in his mouth. He leaves with his ego broken, right? He leaves with resentment. And he only leaves then to come back to try and find more ammunition to now. And now it's not about the hearts, it's about winning the competition. And this was never what da'wah was about. The way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Maw'idatul Hasana means that ud'u ila sabilika, ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idatul hasana. Maw'idatul hasana. What does hikmah mean? Hikmah means that that person's heart was affected. And in the fiqh of da'wah, the person and their heart is more important than the da'wah. What is the sense of having made your point but you lost the person? What is the sense of wanting to apply the sharia even if someone does something wrong, for example? And you want to, a woman who is not perhaps maybe dressing appropriately, in today's time, even perhaps a man who is not dressing appropriately, and you come to the masjid, and so the young man comes from the soccer field or from school, and he's never ever probably ever come to the masjid in his life, and one day he decides to come to the masjid because he feels that, okay, I need to read my salah, and so he comes and he's wearing shorts. He doesn't even know the ahkam of covering the awrah in salah. And we, with our holier than thou attitude, astaghfirullah, how can you enter the masjid in this state? Do you not know the rulings? What happens? You'll never ever come back again. So you applied the sharia, but now you've lost the person to whom the sharia is supposed to be applied. And so the person and their heart is more important than the da'wah. And the fiqh of da'wah is how to win people over first, before we can even tell people what. And we should even keep this in mind with regards to our relationships in the home with our spouses and our children especially. We want them to do certain things. And the way of da'wah is to let that person come at their own time, and to be so gentle and so persuading that they don't even realize that they are being drawn into something. And when they do it, they get the impression that they're doing it, they are the ones who are doing it. And this requires an immense amount of patience. The first step is ta'leef, to win a person over. And that person who comes to the masjid, for example, you might have to leave him also to read his salah in that particular condition if you see that his nafs and his ego is not ready to receive instruction. And so you would go to him, Assalamu alaikum, how are you, brother? Where are you from? Ahlan wa sahlan, how are you doing? Have a nice conversation, pop up his ego a little bit as well. Tell him how nice his hairstyle is, even how his muscles and whatever, and how good he looks in that soccer kit or whatever it is. This is da'wah, right? This is da'wah. And it means being sensitive to the hearts of people and recognizing that da'wah is all about dealing with people's nufus and dealing with their egos. Even when we're having da'wah trips, when mashayikh come down, what happens? Right? People are organizing. Even the organizers themselves will fight amongst each other because he went to this one's house and then go to this one's house, etc., etc. Right or wrong? We're dealing with people's egos and nufus. And therefore, the sensitivity with regards to the egos and nufus is very important to be cognizant of. And da'wah is all about that. If I know, and the nature of the nafs is it doesn't like to be told what to do. A person might want to be doing something, and then you say, see, I told you, automatically that person, even though they wanted to now start doing something, what will happen? They'll give it up. Right? We want to establish our authority over people. And the way of the people of Allah is to bring people in a way, and they don't even want credit for that. And let that person think that they are the one who is plant the seed, and then let them come at their own time. Otherwise, we become munaffirin. We become those who cause others to run away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet warned against this. Right? And he said, Bashiru wala tunaffiru. Yassiru wala tu'assiru. Give glad tidings to people. Do not turn them away. Make things easy for people. Do not make it difficult. Sometimes people want to accept Islam. They will come to the mashayikh, they would say, I want to accept Islam, but the salah 5 times a day, I can never ever do it. I said, no, don't worry about it. There are Muslims also who don't read salah. Salah is important, it's fard. But that person is not ready. He's not even, there's a priority above salah, and that is obviously belief in Allah. See, come aqidah, and then you come at your own time. Just say the shahada, and then you do what you want to at your own time. No rush at all. So a woman also wants to, and this is the problem that even in this jalsa we had with the new Muslims, And many of them are faced with this. They want to accept Islam, but they have this thing in mind, but I've got to wear a scarf, and I've got to do this, and I've got to give up eating this, and I've got to give up. It's all the ahkam, and it's overwhelming for them. And a new Muslim just needs to be taught, just say the Shahada and now learn how to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they are not obliged with regards to a lot of things. There's almost ma'adur, they are forgiven in the beginning of Islam for many things which they would not know. And there was a lady once, she accepted Islam, and she came to the home of a particular family, and they were so happy, mashallah. The first thing they did was they brought her a Quran, they brought her a full hijab, they brought her a sajada, right, a musalla, and they said, I wanted to teach her how to read salah, and they give her all the books on these wudu and whatever. She left after a week. When a person accepts Islam, the first thing they need to feel is they need to feel acceptance in the Muslim community. They need to feel that brotherhood or sisterhood, right? And they need to be given certain forms of adhkar, especially just the repetition of La ilaha illallah, or even if it's Surah Fatiha through a recording or something where they can learn just to be with Allah and enjoy this newfound faith. This is the most, and that might take as long as possible, or as long as they need, until they are ready to then start learning and wanting to practice. Another lady, she wanted to accept Islam, and she said she wouldn't be able to because if she did, her husband would take her child away from her. And she knew everything about Islam, and she was ready. But she had a divorce, and the husband told her that if you accept Islam, and you're going to bring the child up on Islam, then I'm going to go to court, and. And many months had gone by. And the Mashaykh told her, you can, and she was worried because if I accept Islam, then I got to wear a scarf, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. And this is an extraneous circumstance. Mashaykh told her, you can accept Islam and keep it secret. Don't even tell your husband or your ex-husband about it. And you are not obliged to even wear the scarf. And you are not even obliged to read salah in places which are going to cause harm to you and your child. If it means you even miss a salah, then at your time, do the qada. The deen is easy in this particular. Islam does never, ever puts a person in difficulty, right? Because of this, and we need to understand this fiqh of da'wah. Otherwise, we make the deen difficult for people. This obviously we're giving examples with regards to Muslims and non-Muslims, but we do the same in our homes with our children, etc. Many things which are easy, we make it difficult. And so it's important also in learning, when we learn about the knowledge of the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we learn about the fiqh of da'wah. That the message is important, but the person is more important than the message. Otherwise, if there's no person, then there's no message. As for knowledge of the secret being, the sir, meaning the heart, the internal compass of a person, and that is the true focus or locus of one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the concern of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what they call the esoteric secret, the sir. The sir lies within the soul, and the soul lies within the heart, and the heart lies within the body. And obviously the true nature, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best about it. Imam Ghazali speaks about this in the beginning of the Ihya Ulumuddin, in the book of knowledge, especially the relationship between the heart, right, and the mind and the aql and the soul, etc., and how a person through knowledge ought to then condition their hearts. And so as for knowledge of the sir, its obligatory nature is determined by familiarity with its positive requirements and its prohibitions, so that you may acquire reverence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sincere devotion to Him, as well as true intention and integrity in action. The sincerity, the ikhlas, all of that will come later in this book of ours. And the entire chapters of the Ihya are based with this. But how does one get or attain reverence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. And part of the, if we can say, modernization of the world, etc., is to remove that sacredness that we hold. We can remember and recall when we were growing up that how we had this sort of respect and sort of holiness around certain things. And then naturally when we get involved, and especially if we start learning, right, we go to university and we start learning different forms of ideologies and philosophies, etc., especially spending time with people now who start questioning the deen, start questioning certain actions, what happens? Doubt is created. Or that sacredness which we once held in our hearts to something now is is gone away. We will find this now even with the Kaaba. People, when they went to Mecca before, they were in awe of the Kaaba. And from the time they entered the Haram and with their eyes just gazing on the Kaaba, they would be brought to tears. And today people are sitting in the Kaaba, they're facing the Kaaba and taking a selfie with the clock tower behind them. And the clock tower amazes them more than the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the buildings, etc., etc. Right? And this is the purpose of shaitan, is to remove that sacredness from the heart. And the whole purpose of purifying the heart is how to be and maintain that reverence and that awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that every salah that I come to, I've got to bring to mind the magnanimity, the generosity, the kindness, the greatness, the awe of who I am standing in front of. Right? This has to be, and this is the purpose of dhikr as well. It's not just done for the sake of doing it. وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever venerates and reveres the tokens, the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that is an indication of the piety of their heart. And what are the signs of Allah? The signs of Allah is, or are, salah, the Quran, Ramadan, Hajj, right? The Prophet ﷺ himself, the gatherings of knowledge, the gatherings of dhikr. And the only difference between presence and non-presence is this reverence that one brings to mind, the greatness of what I am doing. Sayyidina Ali Zain al-Abidin, when he used to make wudu, already his face would turn yellow. And he would start shivering, and sometimes he would even fall unconscious. And they would ask him why, and he would say, do you realize in whose presence I am going to be presenting myself? And when we say intentions, it is these split seconds bringing to mind of the greatness of what I am actually doing. Number 3 is, for knowledge of the sacred law, its obligatory nature is determined by your familiarity with their practices it requires you to perform, such as purification, the ritual prayer, and fasting is for the pilgrimage, almsgiving, and the sacred struggle jihad. If the obligatory nature applies to you, meaning if a person has accepted Islam, or a person maybe has not yet learnt the rules of Hajj, then they are not yet obligatory upon him until he is now decided. Once you've booked your ticket or you've made the intention to go for Hajj, now it's obligatory for you to learn about Hajj. If the year has come to an end, the lunar year, and your wealth is now zakatable, now it's obligatory upon you to learn the rules of zakah. How many of us pay our zakah, but we don't even know the true nature of our zakah and whether we've actually paid or not paid? And they say, they have a saying in Arabic, they say, al-halal ma da', that halal wealth will never be destroyed. And sometimes we would have occasions when people's wealth would be destroyed, and then not out of negligence, but just, or not out of not wanting to pay zakah, but there would be miscalculations also in their zakah, right? And so true halal wealth is never ever ever destroyed. Even when something was stolen or lost, you tell the person, don't worry, if it was halal money, it will come back. And this would then be the case. So Allah will substitute it with something. And many times we don't lose money in certain ways, except that one of two reasons: that was never ours in the first place, or we had the opportunity to give it in charity or for something, and we didn't take that opportunity. It wasn't meant for us, so Allah took it through other means. So if the obligatory nature applies to you, it is incumbent upon you to acquire the knowledge needed to perform the relevant duties, but otherwise not. Likewise with marriage. It is a sin for a person to get married and they have not learned the rules of marriage, the fiqh of marriage. What is the rights that each spouse has on each other? This is an obligatory nature, just as if a person goes for Hajj and they don't learn the rulings of Hajj, and then they end up doing something in their Hajj which is. And so even in marriages we have, unfortunately, this concept of, if I want to divorce my wife, I have to give her 3 divorces. And people don't even realize that this is an incorrect concept. It is a bid'ah, and it is a sin for a person to divorce their wife, giving 3 divorces, and it makes their life difficult. They will not be able to get back together, again, on the opinion of the 4 madhahib. If a person wants to divorce his wife for whatever reason, and we know divorce is, they shouldn't always, it's the last resort, but it got to that point. A person gives 1 divorce, which is sufficient. But the nature of the divorce is, and the way the Sharia wants a person to give the divorce, is to give the 1 divorce, and then you have to live with that spouse in the same house for those 3 months, or those 3 periods of time. and you've got to live with each other, but you're not allowed to be intimate. This is the true meaning of divorce. That you can live in the house now, you've got to start pondering over. You're not allowed in the Hanafi madhab, if a person divorces his wife, but he touches her or kisses her or is intimate with her, then it's regarded as having taken her back. Now, one divorce is in the Shafi'i madhab, he has to verbally say, I take you back. So once and the divorce is not just pronounced, the divorce has to be written down. 2 witnesses have to be brought. Or 2 witnesses are brought, then the contract is written up and now it's actually officiated. It's not just this haphazard way. And how calculated hasn't the Sharia made it so that a person thinks and ponders about the nature and the seriousness of the issue. If a person wants to divorce his wife, he's got to first go for counseling, bring someone from his side, someone from her side. They have to discuss the issue. Finally, for whatever reason, they decide. Write it down, bring 2 witnesses. It's pronounced, still stay in the same house for up to 3 months. And they've got to go through this thing every day of not being intimate, consciously not even being intimate with each other, knowing that, you know what, we are going through this. And then how will the mind start thinking then? It will start really, is this really something we want to, will I be able to actually go through this? And then the benefit is, even if those 3 months happen, the divorce is enacted, now she goes her way, you go your way. For whatever reason you want to get back together again, you just perform a new marriage contract, because it's only one divorce and it is possible. And this is what the Sharia actually wants. So they get back together again and they start living, because when they were apart and they went through the divorce, now they realize it might have just been my nafs or my ego, and you start missing the person, you're realizing the problems weren't as bad as they were, etc. They come back together again with a new contract, and they can go through that entire process all over again. Live, they have a problem, same thing. Get witnesses, divorce, right? Live together 3 months or however those that period of time, and then they are separated again. And again, if they want to get married again, what happens? With a new contract. If a person divorces his wife and those 3 periods pass by, then the divorce is enacted, and to get back together again, they need to have a new contract. If a person takes his wife back before those 3 months, then there is no new contract. And this would then happen a 3rd time. And after the 3rd time, they would then both know that, you know what, this is something that's not going to actually, that we really can't get along. And then there would be amicability in that divorce. And there would be an understanding that this really isn't something. Who today actually divorces their wives like that? And the way divorce is happening is against the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ, when the Sahaba did this, he said, he regarded it as a way of mocking Allah and mocking the Quran. Right? And he says, is this happening while I am still amongst you? A Sahaba divorced his wife this particular way. The Prophet ﷺ became extremely upset. Now what happens in a society where a person believes that this is the way I'm supposed to divorce my wife? And the first thing the imam or the person, whoever's doing the marriage contract, has to teach the husband is this, right? That if you ever, in fact, in the past, and when we were growing up, we were taught that when you get married, you forget the word divorce. And the purpose of marriage is to make it work, come hell or high waters. This was how our parents were actually brought up. And today it's actually, and what's the reason for all of this? Ignorance of the Sharia. This is undoubtedly the full extent to which it is necessary for the servant to acquire knowledge. Whenever particular knowledge is indispensable, its acquisition becomes an obligatory duty for you. Suppose you might ask, is it obligatory for me to learn so much knowledge of Tawheed that I can use it to destroy all the communities of unbelief? Meaning do I need to learn Tawheed to now deal with all of these philosophers and the Richard Dawkins of the times, etc., etc.? Is that my obligation? And force them to accept the proof of Islam, as well as destroy all heretical innovations and force their perpetrators to accept the proof of the Sunnah? In answer to this question, you must know that this is a collective duty. So the Ummah has to have certain people who are able to reply to the likes of those who would disparage Islam and bring these doubts, but it is not each and every single individual duty. And naturally, sometimes because of the hifz that Allah has for the Ummah, there are people that rise up, right, and who are able to respond, the Zakir Naiks of the time and the Sapiens Institutes of the time, etc., etc. But also it's important for a community to choose individuals who, and they will guide them, coax them very gently, seeing where the potentials of the students are in certain things, and then encourage them to do this. In the same way, if there is a community and there is no doctor in that community, then the entire community is sinful, because medicine is a necessity of that particular time. If the community requires an engineer because the houses are dilapidated, etc., and there's a fear, then the entire community becomes sinful. Just as we know, janaza, salah, etc. This is the fard al-kifaya. So learning these knowledge, or learning this type of knowledge to that very high degree, is a fard kifaya, meaning some of the community are required to do so. Your personal responsibility applies to what enables you to confirm your belief in the basic principles of the religion, not to anything else. It is likewise not incumbent on you to be familiar with all the branches and fine details of the knowledge of Tawheed, nor to investigate all of its problematic questions. Of course, if you experience some doubt concerning the basic principles of the religion, so that you are afraid of impairing your conviction, it is incumbent on you to resolve that doubt by means of any discussion that can lead to satisfaction. And so therefore, there are basic books in all of these things that Imam Ghazali has mentioned: Creed, Fiqh, and Tazkiyah. They are primers. And the Mashaykh, they wrote these primers for the bare basics. Generally, they were written for children, but they were written for Islamic knowledge lies in three tiers. It's beginner, intermediate, and advanced. If you study the beginner in all of the different sciences, in these three sciences, then it is sufficient for a person. The intermediate would want to be a student of knowledge, wants to maybe go to a different level, and then the advanced is for the ulama. And so basically, even 3 books which are chosen in this regard would be sufficient for a person if they want to know their levels. The beginner books, the primers, are important. So in Tazkiyah and the purification of the heart, Bidayat al-Hidayah of Imam Ghazali. With regards to Creed, we have the Aqidat al-Awam of Imam al-Haddad, we have the Aqidat al-Awam of Imam al-Zurruq, and Imam al-Ghazali also has his Aqidah. He called it Risal al-Qudsiyah, but that is more maybe a intermediate or an advanced text. A person then wants to go advanced or intermediate, the Quduri in the Hanafi fiqh, or the Reliance of the Traveller, Sheikh Nukel's translation of that, it exists. And a lot of these things are available online. Sometimes because of the plethora of lessons and courses online, sometimes a person might not know where to begin. And here it's important or advisable for a person to take advice from some of the mashayikh, and to take advice from those who know what's important. Sometimes a person says, do this, do this, do that. A person just needs to have, depending on their level, I want basic knowledge, they would know which are the books you need to read for the basic knowledge. I've done the basics, I need to go to the next intermediate level, then we need to do that. Keeping in mind that there are many, many, many books which have been authored, and they're all just only on the basic level. And so a person studies this book and then he studies another book, not realizing that he is still only in the first level. And if a person, why would they do that, is because if a person has studied a primer or a beginner's text but he has not mastered it, then instead of telling him do the book again, they'll say do a book of someone else which has the same, right, the same information, but it's just maybe a different approach or different style or methodology. When the basics are in order, then they would put them to the next level. So sometimes even in being advised, it's important that a person knows, what level am I on? Am I on a beginner level, an intermediate, or advanced? Now, you must be aware of contention and dispute, for they are a sheer sickness without remedy. Right? These are these debates. You must guard against them with all your might, for if anyone indulges in them, he will not achieve salvation unless Allah shields him with His mercy and His grace. And the nafs likes debates. Sometimes just watching debates, right, makes us argumentative. If we like watching debates and how these argumentations that happen, right, one is the person needs to learn, obviously, to perhaps learn certain forms of a knowledge of how to respond to certain things, but the nafs sometimes likes to argument and debate. And sometimes when watching these debates as well, a person thinks, yes, and I can actually learn this, and I can start debating with the Christians or start debating with these people. And the mind and heart starts also working in wanting. We haven't yet even left the talk, but we are already in our mind thinking about how we are going to respond and how we are going to defend Islam. What does that mean? It means we are, in the eyes of Allah, have become argumentative, because what comes in our heart and what comes in our mind is, right, ultimately what will then come out of the tongue. So we haven't yet even spoken, but we will be described as those who are argumentative, right? And so therefore, a person has to protect their heart, protect their thoughts as well. If a person is learning, we have to learn. Even when it comes to fiqh, in the books of fiqh, right? They would, the Shafi'i say that, and the Hanafi say this, and this is their proof, and our response to their proof is this, and their proof is that, and we don't accept their proof because reading fiqh makes you argumentative. That is why a person, and the scholars, they would impress upon the students to have that portion of the day where they would then soften this nature by reading the books of tazkiyah and soften the heart. And a person who studies the deen but does not learn the purification of the heart, then he becomes argumentative, and his entire nature then becomes one of disputation and trying to prove the other wrong, right, and calling the other by names, etc., etc. And Imam Ghazali also speaks about this. Next, you should know what will happen if in every land there is a missionary, a da'i from the people of the Sunnah, one who resolves all doubts and refutes the heretical innovators, one who is uniquely equipped with this knowledge and who purifies the hearts of the people of the truth by ridding them of the heretical insinuations. In such a case, the duty will cease to apply to everyone other than him. It is likewise unnecessary for you to be familiar with the subtle details of the knowledge of the sir of the heart and the full interpretation of the marvels of the heart, with the exception of anything that is liable to spoil your worship, for then you need to be familiar with it in order to avoid it. And likewise, in the science of the purification of the heart, there is beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels of books. That is why Imam Ghazali wrote Bidayatul Hidayah, Minhaj al-Abidin, and the Ihya. And so also in the purification of the heart, we first start with the primers. Person learns generally how to keep their heart pure of some of these spiritual diseases, right? And then they don't have to go to this very, very, very great degree unless they want to. When it comes to the ulama as well, Imam Ghazali speaks about this, and it's important for us and for our communities to realize that there needs to be ulama for the ulama, and then there needs to be ulama for the awam. And this is a problem we face in this country, that many of the people that study, and even when we send our children to study, they then graduate and they teach where? They teach in institutes, and they produce the next generation of ulama. And then those ulama open up institutions, and then they create the next institution of ulama. But when do those ulama ever interact with society? And there is a disparity now between the ulama and the awam. If you go to school, if you go to university, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, etc., etc., in your daily life, unless you have friends, right, you never ever interact with the ulama in terms of learning the deen and learning the religion from them. And our interaction with the ulama, if we are just the non-ulama class, is on a friendly basis because we invite them home, or they are our neighbors, or there's a wedding, etc., etc. But the sharing of knowledge never actually takes place. And so there needs to be, Imam Ghazali calls them wa'ad, there needs to be ulama whose job it is to spend time with the general public, to avail themselves, to teach on a daily basis in the masjid. And the masajid every masjid should not be without lessons. And we should call our ulama to account, in the imams of our masjid. Why is there not a lesson after Fajr till Ishraq? Why is there not a lesson in the evening? Why are there not evening classes for people who are working? Those who are working and going to university and cannot go and sit in a Darul Ulum or in a masjid in the times from 8 to 5, which generally are the times which these Darul Ulums and these institutes have their lessons, it is obligatory on the ulama to establish gatherings of knowledge in the masajid, so that someone who is working, when he comes back at 5, that at least he can come for an evening class between Maghrib and Isha, or after Isha. And not once a week. There has to be daily classes, because how much is there to actually learn? And so the ulama there has to be a group of ulama who avail themselves for the people, to teach the people the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to teach the people the purification of the heart. And then there is that category of ulama who now focus on producing the next generation of ulama themselves on this very high level, and they would go to details into usulul fiqh and to become muftis, etc., etc. Unfortunately, this is the problem. When we send our children to learn as well, this is the only concept we have in our mind, that we're going to become an alim, they're going to do this, but we have no idea of how are they actually now going to operate in society. And if we, the ulama, we have to call ourselves to account for this, but those that are the working class have to also call the ulama to account. And we have a plethora of ulama in this country. Each and every single one needs to be teaching. If they have learned, then the zakah of the knowledge is that it is taught. Even if it is just one lesson, we say at the very least one lesson a day. Basic on these three things, because Imam Ghazali says this is obligatory, right? Basic fiqh, basic aqidah, and basic tazkiyah. Every masjid has to have lessons in which these three things are being taught. And at least, if they don't want to do dhikr in a group or whatever, then at least to give a space for people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do some dhikr and do some adhkar and recitation of Quran over and above da'wah. Where then are we with regards to opening up our masjids to non-Muslims? Classes for non-Muslims to teach people about Islam. People are asking, where are the Muslims? When a non-Muslim accepts Islam, where do they go? Do they even feel welcome in our masjid? Would they be able to even come into our masjid? The masjid is supposed to be a place where classes on marriage is being held on a regular basis, because people are getting married every single day. And in these courses, they would have to teach people about marriage, about divorce, etc. And then more importantly, for students who are at university and they're being faced with all of these different ideologies, etc., they have to be given the information of how to remain firm and strong. And so there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and it requires cooperation from both sides. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to inspire us with our correct course of action and to grant us tawfiq. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa ila hadratin nabiy sayyidina